Hello, I'm Victor Yalom, and I'm pleased to be here today with Irvin Yalom, a well-known psychiatrist, psychotherapist, and author, as well as my father. Nice to be here with you
Good to be
today.
here with you, Victor.
We're going to have the opportunity in a few minutes to see excerpts of a brief but complete course of therapy with a young woman in her early 20s named Eugenia. You actually saw her for a total of 9 sessions, and we filmed 4 of these sessions with her willing agreement, of course, and we're going to see excerpts of those 4 sessions. Throughout those sessions, we'll hear some commentaries by you, and then after each session, you and I will meet together briefly and discuss those sessions. Our hope is that this will make a useful training video for therapists who want to learn about therapy in general and also your approach to therapy. People have read your books, but it's different to actually see what you or any therapist looks like actually in the room with clients. So it's a rare opportunity to do that. She presents with an unusual symptom, certainly for someone her age. A couple months prior to the first session, she'll report, as we'll see, having kind of an out-of-the-blue sense of existential panic. She'll go into details about that, and that was one of the reasons she sought you out and jumped at the opportunity to obtain these sessions from you. It presents as somewhat of a mystery. How did she have this panic out of the blue? And it makes for a challenging case. And I think that's really kind of one of the central themes of the therapy is trying to make sense.
Yeah, it is. It is a theme. It's a good theme for students to see. I think she was a riddle, a puzzle to me, and to others who see this in the very beginning, and gradually, the riddle unraveled a bit, and we got it by the 9th time we saw her had a clearer understanding, but lots still remains unknown to me. So the enlightenment comes slowly.
Yeah. Well, I
And
think
I'd rather do it that way, learn clearly, and not pretend that I know more than I do in the very beginning.
yeah.
That's one of the reasons I don't like diagnosis. Sometimes you diagnose someone and then they've got to fit completely within that diagnosis, which means that you fail to see other phenomena that lie outside that. I like to go into it with kind of a blank slate.
Yeah, or if you have
Every person's different.
prescribed type of treatment that's being taught these days, a structured, almost cookbook type of approach for a certain diagnosis, and you're saying, how could I do that? I don't know. I don't know what her diagnosis is. I don't know who she is. I don't know what's causing her problems.
And I also believe you need to create a different therapy for every patient.
Yeah, you've said that before, and that makes a lot of sense.
And it shows up in this patient, I think.
Yeah, and one of the nice things about seeing your work with her, I think, is that oftentimes on video, clients are cherry-picked in a sense, or whether they're actors or real clients, to show how therapy is done, as if it's always done that easily. And we know, any experienced therapist knows, therapy is hard. If people could solve their problems, they wouldn't be coming to see us. We'd be out of business. So I think it's an enlightening case. It's good work. It's challenging. And with that said, let's jump into the first session and take a look at your work with her.
Good. So tell me what's happened recently.
Yeah, so recently, I've been trying so hard to pinpoint where it all started. It's only been about like 2.5 months, 2 months of this.
Yeah. So okay, but
So it doesn't sound long, but every day is kind of long for me.
So in other words, you're doing perfectly well until roughly 10 weeks ago.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you've been living up here. You've been in a fairly new job.
No, I've had the job for a while. I've always wanted to live in San Francisco my whole life.
Yeah.
I'm healthy. I have great friends. I have a great family. I have a boyfriend. Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong in
Okay.
life right now.
The relationship with your boyfriend is working well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
How long have you been involved with him?
only about a year and a few months.
Okay.
Yeah, and my family is really supportive. I have great roommates, friends. Like, I feel like I am very thankful to be living this kind of great life.
Okay.
So I think as I was saying, I was trying to pinpoint where this all started for me. And I went recently, like right before it started, to New York.
Yeah.
It was like my first time there, or not my first time, but first time in a long time.
When was that?
So it was about like 2.5 months ago.
Okay.
And I was really excited for this big trip, and I got to visit my friend who's starting grad school at NYU. And for some reason, we were walking down the street, and out of nowhere, I got like this feeling of anxiety in my stomach. And I was like, oh, this is really weird. Like, I haven't felt anxiety in years. Like, wonder what it's coming from. I hope it doesn't come. Like, all the typical thoughts that come with anxiety.
Yeah.
So that was pretty.
So out of nowhere, you just suddenly were
Yeah, and then I tried to
anxiety.
dive into it later when I got home, and I was like thinking about it, and then that's when. So basically, I'm gonna talk to you how everything unfolded until today.
Sure. Okay.
So I was in New York, and then I came here, and I was like, whoa, like, what was that all about? And then I started thinking about like how many people there are in the world, because in New York it was just like crazy madness. So I just started to think about how many people are in the world, and I looked up, I was like just reading, and I found this definition for this fake word. I think it's a fake word, and it's called sonder. And
Sonder?
Yeah, and it's from this thing called the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. And this word, I should have brought the definition, but it says like about how many people there are that you'll never see, that will never see you, and like it's like a huge anthill that like your paths may cross for a second. You could just be a blur on the freeway to them, kind of thing. And that like was very interesting to me, and it, for some reason, it made me feel very anxious and insignificant, and just like, wow, there's so many, like, why does it matter if I sit on this bench or if I don't sit on this bench, or why does it matter if I wear these shoes or other shoes, or if I say this thing or not this thing? So that's kind of where it started growing. And then it started growing more into like more existential thoughts of like, who am I even, or like, why are we even here, or like, what's the point of anything? And those were really hard questions for me to answer, because I know from the reading I've done thus far, I know that there is no real one answer, and like everyone makes their own answer.
At this point, as a therapist, I feel a bit bewildered. One thing I know for certain is that this sudden attack of existential angst does not come out of nowhere. It's inconceivable that life could have been going entirely well for her, and then suddenly this out of the blue attack. So we've got to begin to track it down. One outstanding characteristic of the attack is her sense of insignificance, which is triggered by being in a large city. However, she grew up in a large city in Los Angeles, and we're going to need to start investigating the meaning of this riddle.
So that happened, and I kept reading. I just kept trying to read, and I was reading a lot of Camus, and I read The Myth of Sisyphus, and it was just all about. Have you read that book? Or yeah. So yeah, I'm sure you have those.
Yeah.
So that was interesting to me, and then I kept reading, I just like felt like I wasn't at the root of the problem quite yet. And then interestingly enough, I picked up your book, staring at the sun, and I started reading it, and I was like, oh wait, I think this all makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
I think the root of all of this is the whole fear that like life is going to be over one day. And I think that I always knew that, of course, I knew that that was going to happen
Sure.
my whole life. Like,
Yeah.
I've known many people to die. Like, it's not like I've never experienced it, but up until this moment or these 2 months, I've never put that much thought into it ever. Like, I've always just like pushed it aside. And now that I've been thinking so much about it, I just cannot. I feel like I've realized something that cannot be unrealized it to the depths, and I just see no
Cannot
point.
be unrealized. Huh?
Yeah.
You can't repress it.
I can't unknow what
yeah.
is known because I know it now and it's a
Okay.
fact. And
Okay.
I don't want to repress it because I feel as though there's no point. And I know I'm only 23, but it's just like I see no reason to like I have no motivation to do anything because it all comes down to like there is no point.
Tell me a little bit about how uncomfortable you are for these last 10 weeks now.
Mhm.
You know, yesterday, last week.
Mhm.
How much discomfort are you feeling?
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's still there.
Oh yeah, it's a lot of discomfort.
Mhm.
It's definitely feeling lonely in the sense that I know other people have these thoughts, but I feel like while I look around and my loved ones and just the world, I feel like all these people don't get it kind of thing, or like how are they doing? Like why does this person care about
Yeah.
getting their master's degree? Like anything they learn will be gone kind of thing. And then so lonely is the first thing, and then stuck.
So in these last few weeks, you're going about your daily routine. You're going to work every day and functioning there,
Yeah.
but your feelings are bad all the time. How about your dreaming?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have normal dreams, and it's really interesting because when I was reading your book, I realized a lot of people had like dreams that had to do with death.
Yeah.
And then I finished reading one chapter, and that night I had a horrible nightmare. And it was like the first time I had a nightmare in so long.
Really?
And I think it might have been because I was like reading and other people having nightmares, so then I ended up having one. But
Do you remember the content of the nightmare?
yeah, I was at work and I was looking out the window, and then someone came in the room.
This was how long ago?
This was like 3 weeks ago.
3 weeks, and it's still very fresh in your mind?
Yeah, because I was really scared when I woke up because I hadn't had a nightmare in forever.
Well, tell me, you still see it in your mind's eye,
Yeah,
the dream. Just describe it. If you can, just do it in the
yeah,
present tense.
definitely.
That I'm at work.
Okay.
Put it that way.
I am at work
Mm-hmm.
and I'm looking out the window where my desk is,
Yeah.
and someone runs into the room and they're like, oh, there was just a shooting outside. And then we look outside and there are like acrobats on the top of the lamppost.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like just posing and like looking, like showing off like that they just killed someone kind of thing. And then we're like, oh, okay, we gotta go, we gotta get out of here. And so we go to the back and try to get out the fire escape, but now the fire escape is at my house. So we're going down the fire escape and we're trying to rush, and then we get to the bottom of the fire escape on the floor, which is not at my house anymore, it's just some sketchy alleyway. And we're hiding behind a trash can, and the acrobats roll or drive by with their car windows open, and they're blasting music, which is Russian. And
Russian music.
yeah, that's my first language.
I
So I
see.
think that somehow came in that way.
I see.
And like we're really scared trying to be quiet, like they're just driving by, like we're trying to go unnoticed. And then we run into a store and do the same thing, and they drive by, and then I woke up. So I think that signified like me just hiding or like just learning about death and seeing it like posing itself.
Yeah.
And then like trying to hide from it constantly. And I think the acrobats, I know where those came in.
Tell me what that means.
That is just I work in graphic design, and one of the projects we just did, we were illustrating acrobats. and
Okay.
like talking about how their bodies
Right.
go. So that's where the acrobats came from.
Yeah. So the acrobats were killers. They were
Yeah.
lethal. And you were afraid they'd see you, but they didn't see you.
hmm
Okay. And the Russian music. Tell me about that.
I have no idea why they were listening to Russian music in their car. I think it might have, I don't remember what was going on that day.
But you say Russian was your first language?
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you born there?
No, I was born here. I was the first one born here
Yeah.
in my family, and they're from Azerbaijan.
Mm-hmm. So you spoke Russian at home?
Yeah, kind of a mixture of both, like with my grandma only Russian, but yeah,
Yeah.
Russian at home.
Right. So what do you make of that? The music was
I
Russian.
really, like, I don't know. I honestly hadn't read that much into the Russian part because there are many times where I just dream in Russian, or
You
like
dream in Russian.
like it's just music
Yeah.
to me. I don't know if it's specific
Mhm.
because it was just they were listening to music in their car to me. I don't know.
Do you listen to Russian music now very often?
Not very often.
So it sounds like it's from an earlier stage of life. The
Maybe.
music.
I don't listen to it often, but my family does all the time.
Yeah.
So maybe. I don't know. Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there is something in there.
This is the first dream in therapy to which we should always give particular attention. It's emblematic of the fact that she's discovering and dealing the presence of death in life. I'm reminded here of a statement by Otto Rank, who was a colleague of Freud's, and he said that some people so dread the debt of death that they're unwilling to accept the loan of life. As you'll see, she refers to this quote herself later. The curious part of this dream to me is the background of Russian music, which I can only imagine signifies some important link with some much earlier phases of her life. That's about all we can discern at this point. I suspect will become more clear later in therapy. At this moment, she's taking a very odd position. She's saying, in effect, death is so terrible, I'm unwilling to enter life. We'll skip ahead to later in session 1, where I go back to her experience of the existential panic in New York.
And here it was just like people and like heat and just like subways, and I was just very overwhelmed, and I was just thinking about like if I just stopped and walked another way, like no one would know ever.
I've got a feeling that somehow, and I'm just guessing really, but I've got a feeling somehow the thoughts you're thinking about were somehow percolating under the surface.
Probably,
Something
yeah.
happening in New York that just opened it all up. Do you have
Probably.
any idea of anything percolating under the surface before then with any of these thoughts?
With any of these thoughts?
Any of the thoughts that you're having?
No, I really can't. Like when I used to see a bunch of people, I would just think like, wow, look at all these people. Like they all have a favorite color and they all have a worry today and they all love something. And like, that's so interesting that we all have our own thing. Or like I would look at a plane in the sky and I would think like, wonder where those people are going, or where the person in the third row, what he's thinking, he or she is thinking about right now. And it would interest me.
Yeah.
And like now it's like, wow, look at all the planes. There's so many people everywhere and we're all gonna die.
Sounds like you have a kind of a tendency, ability to kind of reflect on what other people are feeling. Look at those people. What's that guy thinking?
I definitely have,
Yeah,
but it was always very positive and exciting.
Right.
Yes.
I see that. But
So yeah, I definitely have always noticed other
what
people.
things look like from the standpoint of other people.
Yeah,
and just get outside of yourself.
Or just like on the bus, seeing someone walk down the street, and I'd be like, oh, I hope they're having a good day. Or like, I wonder what they're going to go do and what made them laugh today, kind of thing.
Can you trace that back a little bit in your life? Any ideas when that began? I mean, I think it's a great trait to be able to
Yeah.
think of other people. I mean, I guess we call it empathy.
Yeah.
What are other people thinking? So, any
don't
childhood experiences that come to mind as you think about that?
I honestly can't think of any, but
Mhm.
I think it's always been kind of how I am, how I've been,
Mhm.
just interested in other people.
How about back in your family? Any models for that?
What I'm hearing here is a strong early sense of empathy that Eugenia has. In fact, it's almost hypertrophied or excessive empathy that at times could lead to a loss of sense of self. I can only assume this is something developed very early in her life as a result of her childhood parental experience and environment. We'll get back to this later. Of course, let's not forget there's a positive side to her sense of empathy in that it enables her to relate well to others. As we're going to see, she's able to develop a strong bonding relationship with her boyfriend. She's gone deeply into her sense of isolation, and in the next section, you'll see me begin to explore her thoughts and feelings about death.
Another thing I was thinking about actually the other day
Yeah.
was I've always never wanted my grandma to die.
All right. How old is she?
She's in her 80s.
In her 80s. She in good health?
Yeah. I mean, she's in good health, but I think she's got like things here and there. Like she needs to be careful when she walks and like
Mm.
she takes medicine for certain things. But
Mm.
other than that,
When did you have that thought?
always.
Always. You don't
Yeah.
don't want her. You're very close to her.
Yeah, she's like, she kind of, I grew up with her. And like, even when I was little, I was like, even when I didn't even know, I always didn't want her to die, but I never really thought how deep it was, how
Yeah.
deep death was until now. It was
Right.
always just like a thing I thought.
Right. Grandmothers. So
Yes.
grandmothers are really
Yeah, yeah.
central figures to
Yes,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
So as I was growing up, definitely spent a lot of time with her, and yeah, I'd always just been like worried to let her go, kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
or like I was scared of her dying, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But I didn't even know what dying meant. I felt
know.
like until now.
When you say I was scared of her dying, can you describe that idea in any other way? Elaborate on it. Being scared of her dying.
Yeah, I just didn't want to lose her. I didn't want her to no longer be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I didn't really think what would happen to her. So maybe it was more selfish.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tell me, what do you remember? If we kind of go back and let's do a history of your early experiences and awareness of death.
Mhm.
What do you remember about death? When did you first ever think about this, or see anything that died, or get the idea that things, that people, that animals die?
I don't remember when it first started. Like,
Mhm.
I feel like I knew things died.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, there would be family
What's your
members that I didn't know that would die. Oh, you know what? There was one time where someone died and I was the one that heard about it. It was
what
really
was that?
sad.
Tell me
It
about
was my brother's bar mitzvah photographer.
your brother's bar mitzvah.
Photographer.
The photographer. Okay.
Yeah, he was like a really cool guy.
Yeah.
And we all knew him well because he was doing our photos. Or
Yeah.
he did our photos.
Right.
And then the lady that worked for him called and she was like, "Hi, like, can I please speak to the Mordecais?" And I was like, "Oh, that's me." And she's like, "Oh, hey, just to let you know, like, Art died of a heart attack and we're trying to figure out what to do with his photos."
I see.
And I was like 12. So I was like, "Oh, okay. I'll let my mom know." And
So
then
you got a call. You got a phone call.
yeah.
I see.
So that was one. I was
So
also there
that's
with,
your first personal
I
experience.
think,
Uh-huh.
yeah, that was my first personal. And then the second one was
Mhm.
definitely when my grandmother passed away, my other grandmother.
Your father's mother.
Yeah.
Yeah. When was that?
That was when I was in high school.
She was here.
Yes, she was in Los Angeles. I lived there.
So you spent time with her as well.
Oh
So,
yeah, definitely.
oh
But I
yeah.
was closer with my other grandma.
Right.
But I always loved her so much too.
Yeah.
And I was actually in the room holding her hand when she died.
You were 12?
No, that was when I was in high school.
Oh, in
So
high
I
school.
was like I'd just taken the SATs.
What do you remember about that scene?
That was really bad
Yeah.
and hard and sad. And like,
Tell me what happened. What can you reconstruct it for me?
yeah, I remember the last time I saw her, she had cancer. And so,
Cancer.
yeah,
Do you remember what kind?
yes, it was the blood kind.
Leukemia.
Yes, she had leukemia.
Yeah.
And so we were visiting her. I didn't really think she was gonna die, and I was young. And I was just like visiting her to make her feel happy, and
Yeah.
I wasn't worried about losing her, I guess. And then that night she had an aneurysm, so she was unconscious. And then the next day we were in the hospital, and my parents finally called my brother and told him. And so he was driving back from Riverside where he was going to school, and it was really interesting. Like, I thought it was interesting because the nurse came in to say like it's about to happen. So we all went into the room, and I was like, we're like whispering in her ear and kissing her and like holding her hand. And then the elevator opened, my brother got in the room, like kissed her, said something in her ear, and then like 3 seconds later she died, which was pretty I thought that was pretty crazy at the time. Like, whoa, like she waited for him.
She waited for him. Yeah.
I don't know.
You were holding her hand at that time.
And it was like, I guess it was pretty crazy seeing someone you love, like, and hold them, like, go from alive to not alive.
Yeah.
So that was, I don't regret it being in the room.
That's a pretty powerful experience, though, holding someone's hand as they're dying.
Yeah. But it was really sad for me. And it was, of course, I always relive that moment. Or if I see pictures of her, I'll start crying. But like, even then, I never was like, I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
Or like, yeah, I knew I was gonna die, and like we always talk about like bucket list things, or like before I die I want to do this, but I feel like it's so lightly said. Like I never really thought about like actually me being gone forever and never coming back.
But you knew by that time, this was when you were an adolescent, that you held your grandmother's hand, you saw her die, but the thought hadn't really thundered down on you that, oh, I'm going to die too.
Definitely not.
That had never occurred to you, really.
I mean, like, I knew I was going to die. Of course I knew that, but it never was like, sit down and think about me going into oblivion forever.
Right. So you knew I'm going to die, but you didn't explore it deep.
Definitely not. Because I was like, why should you explore deeply? You're not going to be conscious when you're dead. It doesn't matter.
So I think what you're saying is that you knew about death. You saw your grandmother die. I mean, you couldn't be any closer to death at that point. And you must have and then of course the photographer, he died too.
Yeah, and then family members, my grandma's brother.
Ever go to funerals before?
Yeah.
Whose funerals did you attend?
I've been to my grandma's funeral, my grandpa's funeral,
I mean, this is earlier. Your grandmother.
My grandpa died after my grandma.
Okay. How about earlier on?
Oh, earlier on? No.
What's the first experience in your life of death? Any ideas? When did it first come to your mind?
Probably a distant family member that I didn't know about that my parents told me. And maybe it would help to mention that my family has a very interesting way of mentioning when someone dies.
How do they say it?
This is like the ultimate. My mother, she'll just, if someone dies, she'll call and she'll be like, hey, how's it going? Like, have a normal conversation. And then she'll be like, oh, nothing. Like, I just wanted to let you know that blah, blah, blah is very sick. That's the first stage.
So very sick is a code word for they died.
Well, now I've learned that, like, well, sometimes they are actually very sick, but other times I'm like, okay, like, what do you mean they're very sick? What's wrong with them? She's like, well, like
That's breaking the news.
Yeah, she's very like, and then I'm like, what do you mean? Like, how long have they been sick for? And then she'll be like, well, they actually died this morning. And I was like, okay, like, and like that's a very nice way of doing it, definitely.
It was a good way of doing it, you think?
Well, I don't know. I'd actually rather, I don't know. I told her though, if my grandma ever is anywhere close to very sick, that I should know
Yeah.
right when she's a little sick.
Right.
So
And that idea, your grandmother's still living.
yeah.
That idea of your grandmother dying, I mean, there's a part of you that seems to know that she will be the next one.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
I always, that's something I always think about, or like I've even thought about like what I would say at her funeral, or like every time I visit home, I think like I wonder if this is the last time kind of thing. So definitely that's one thing with death that I guess goes. But again, I've never put it on myself until now, and now that I have, I don't see a point in living.
Note here the distinction between content and process. The content of this segment is very obvious. I am asking her about her early experiences with death. But the process is that she is describing some exceedingly frightening episodes in her life with someone who is calm, supportive, listening, trying to help her clarify what she felt during this time. So this investigation is also a type of corrective emotional experience, or deconditioning to the behaviorally minded. How about in your classrooms? Any other people die, children die, or encounter any of that?
I mean, when I was younger, not when I was younger, but I always hear about tragic deaths, like on the news. Like I've heard all the worst stories growing up. Or like my friend's mom was walking to yoga and a car hit her, swerved and hit her, and she was completely healthy, and the next moment she was gone. Or like, of course.
But it sounds like even though you knew her, it somehow you didn't let yourself really know that, or what it meant, or experience it.
I think that's a good point. Right. I think I've always disconnected myself, and right now I'm disconnected with the world. I feel like I don't care about anything that's happening, and I'm just watching because it doesn't matter.
But another way of putting that is you've always disconnected yourself, but now that's somehow disappeared. You really let it into you.
I'm connecting myself with the death, but in turn, I feel as though I'm disconnecting from the world and life.
Well, let me put it another way, that maybe you're connecting yourself with reality.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
And this is reality.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the deal.
Yeah, it is reality.
This is the deal. Every living creature dies.
I think that's what I need to accept.
Yeah. Right.
But I can't. It's like I just learned this even though I knew it, I feel like I just learned it, and I can't accept it. I feel like I've been given this terminal illness of life.
You've always had it, though.
I know.
You've always had it. So, I just want to put it to you that this is a positive thing, not a negative thing. You're grasping something really fully, but it's something that one has to grasp.
I hope. Yeah, I know. I guess the reason I'm taking it so negatively is because I'm feeling so negative and depressed and don't want to do anything. And I'm trying to see it, and I can't right now. And then I look back to when I wasn't grasping it and I was happy. So that's why I'm looking at it negatively, but I know that there's no going back. And once I grasp it, if I can, then I can live my life, but I can't get there yet. It was this one quote that I felt like what I'm doing right now. And it was like, you don't want to, it ended with the debt of death. You're like, you don't want to accept the gift of life because you know you'll be in the debt of death.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that was an interesting quote.
Yeah.
I think it was a colleague of Freud's.
I think it was.
There's a man named Otto Rank.
Yeah, exactly. That's the part that
some people refuse to accept the gift of life because they don't want the debt of death, something like that. Right?
That's like
what
one thing I highlighted.
He wrote that for you.
Seriously.
For this, absolutely. That it's hard for you to accept the gift of life because you fear the death.
Yeah, it's like, why live life? Why go down the street? Why learn or read a new book when you're just gonna die?
I had a conversation with another patient just very recently. Oh dear, we're gonna have to stop in a couple of minutes, but we'll pick this up next week.
Okay.
But I had a conversation with a patient recently, and we were talking about this, and the issue of summer camp came up.
Mhm.
I guess I brought it up. Something she said made me think of going to summer camp, and I used to go to camp every summer for a month. I
Mhm.
lived in the East Coast, and it
Mhm.
was
Me
hot,
too.
hot and crowded and dangerous there. So my parents sent me to summer
Mhm.
camp. But but the idea that, well, you go to summer camp and you've got this whole month or even 2 months ahead of you, but suppose you got really upset that it was going to end, so you couldn't possibly enjoy the camp ending.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a kind of
Yeah, I
but
get that.
it's
It's
a
like, or watch a movie. How can you wrote that in the book? Like, oh, so certain things, like, why would you watch a movie if you know it's gonna end? But like,
Mhm.
I feel like I can do those things because I'll still be alive
Yeah.
when they end.
Right.
Like, this is like the ending is the end.
Yeah. It is very, very hard to really grasp the fact
Yeah, like
that
I'm
we
fine
won't.
with walking through the park knowing the trail will end. I can enjoy the trees, but I for some reason can't enjoy the life because it's like, wow, it's really going to be over. Everything is meaningless.
Well, you really covered a lot of ground and dug into things in the first session. I want to ask you a few questions about uh, those last several clips
Mhm.
where you did what I guess could be referred to as a death history.
Mhm.
We're used to doing family histories or maybe an occupational history, but that's something that I think most therapists don't do or haven't even thought about doing, is asking a client about a history of what their first and later experiences of death were. Can you say a little bit about that?
Sure. I don't do that with every client, but with Eugenia, it's really very, very relevant. And
Because of her presenting concerns.
right, right. So I want to find out as much as I can about the early development of her feelings and thoughts and phobias about death. And so generally the kinds of questions I want to ask her are, first of all, her first awareness of this.
Mm.
Some clients will say death of a pet. That's very common.
Yeah.
Even seeing falling dead leaves. One question I'll always ask is about first funerals they've gone to, or
Uh-huh.
first deaths they've encountered,
Uh-huh.
or whether they're permitted to go to funerals. And so she had a lot to say about that. One of the important things she says, this keys something in my mind. I've clicked it. I'll go back to it. My thought is her mother never mentioning the word death. She says very sick,
Right.
which I'm guessing the mother has some really deep phobias about death that she may have, unwittingly sort of passed on to her daughter. So I'm making a point. I want to come back to that later. So she's had a good bit of experience with death.
One thing I thought was an interesting distinction that kind of got highlighted there was this awareness of death uh, for other people,
Right.
but somehow a separation or a buffer between that realization and I'm going to die. When she talked about, for example, her grandmothers,
Hmm.
she got this was an important person. She got
Hmm.
fully,
Yeah.
and she was there when her grandmother died. You can't
Right.
have a more, uh, concrete, real experience
Hmm.
holding her hand. And yet, somehow, she said it didn't really sink in that meant that she was going to die.
That was very clear. She does not make the link that this is going to happen to me also. Uh, and a lot of people can remember. I can remember for myself this sudden awareness that thunders on you. This applies to me as well. Everybody's going to die, and it's almost as though she's really experiencing it right now for the first time, which is very, very late in life to have that kind of thunder down upon you. So that's true. This idea of the vanishing, disappearing self is extremely frightening to her now.
Uh-huh. And it's a kind of a subtle distinction because she said, yes, of course I knew I was going to die, but somehow didn't really take it in.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um,
So that's one of the riddles we'll kind of explore in later sessions. Why not? Why so late? What was going on in that family that kind of didn't enable her to comprehend this earlier?
mm. And one one of the ways you responded was almost, this is a gift to
Mhm.
you. This is the reality.
Mhm.
You're learning something about
Yeah.
the life and the nature of existence.
Right. And I am making a point of going into it extremely openly and without a lot of emotion or affect. I'm doing some kind of almost you might call it deconditioning in a way.
Yeah.
I'm hearing this all in a sort of a calm manner and not sort of stopping anywhere, kind of going to the limits of this.
Yeah.
So here's a good example of the difference between content of a session and process.
Yeah.
Content, we're asking these questions about. The content is I'm being calm, I'm being safe, I'm applying these things to myself.
You mean
I'm,
the process?
yeah, the process,
Yeah.
right, the process. So I'm applying these things to myself, and I'm hoping to help convey to her the sense of some calmness rather than, oh my God, you know.
Yeah. Or you're modeling that for her, that
Right, right,
that's a possible way
right.
of facing
Mhm.
death. Okay, so now let's jump ahead to see some of your work in session 2 with her.
Okay.